What is up, guys? It's Doodoo Poker here, back for another video. Today we are going to be talking about the difference between a small blind 3-bet and a big blind 3-bet as the out of position pre-flop raiser versus the button. You need to be playing these spots much differently. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the aggregate reports. We're going to go through all the different sizing differences, and then I'm going to show you in hand history to illustrate how much different these spots actually are. So what I did was I went over the flop aggregate reports, and here we see the small blind 3-bet versus a button call. We notice all the different sizings and the checking percentages. What you notice is we're using more smaller sizings like bet 20 and bet 33, and not quite as many bigger sizings. Now let's compare this to a big blind 3-bet versus a button call. What we see here is we're going to be checking more than the small blind, and we're using bigger sizing. So what I did was I made a chart to make it easy for us to visualize this. We see if we're comparing the small blind 3-bet versus a big blind 3-bet against a button call, you see the small blind is C-betting more overall, 66.1%, and the big blind is C-betting less at 53.6%. We also see sizing-wise that the small blind is using more bet 20 and more bet 33, and the big blind is using more bet 50 and more bet 75. We're also jamming a bit more, but that is a minor concern. So let's go to notes. We know in general that you C-bet higher frequency in the small blind and you use smaller sizing, and in the big blind you C-bet lower frequency and you also use bigger sizing. But we want to look at a hand example that perfectly illustrates this spot and these differences. Let's go to GTO Wizard and look at an ace-king 2 board from the small blind 3-bet's perspective, and also versus the big blind's 3-bet perspective against a button call. What do you think the differences will be? Well, we can look at it right now. Let's say we are in the small blind, we 3-bet, and the button, who is a reg, calls, and the flop comes ace-king 2. Now, you've probably been in this spot before, and it is a good strategy just to C-bet range. Now, we see some higher sizings, but mostly you're using bet 20 for close to range. But what happens if all I do is change the small blind to a big blind 3-bet? What do you think is going to happen to the flop strategy? Are we still ranging? Well, let's find out. Let's go to a button RFI. Now I'm going to 3-bet from the big blind, and I'm going to put the same exact board: ace of spades, king of hearts, 2 of diamonds. Now watch what happens to the flop strategy from the big blind. Now, instead of ranging, you're mostly checking, and you're almost never using small sizing. So two huge differences. In the first spot, in the small blind 3-bet versus button on an ace-king 2 board, you want to go small mostly, and you're almost ranging. Now in this spot, you're almost never using a bet 20 and you're mostly checking. Two huge differences, and all I did was change a big blind 3-bet and a small blind 3-bet. Because why? Because of the pre-flop range composition. Hands like aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, and 9s almost never want to bet on the flop. Conversely, hands like aces, kings, queens, jacks, 10s, and 9s mostly want to bet on the flop. So huge difference in strategy. Now, this is the best board to illustrate the differences in pre-flop. On an ace-king 2 board, hands like kings, queens, and jacks have no real reason to bet, because what do we know about the big blind 3-bet? It's a polarized range. When you have a polarized range, you bet less, but you bet bigger. When you have a linear range, like in the small blind 3-bet versus button, you bet more often, but you bet smaller. So two differences in strategies, and this really showcases the difference in pre-flop from a small blind 3-bet versus a big blind 3-bet. So let's go over what we learned. We learned that when you're comparing a small blind 3-bet versus a big blind 3-bet, you want to c-bet more from the small blind. You also want to use smaller sizing in general. From the big blind 3-bet versus button, you want to use bigger sizing in general and c-bet less. We see this very distinct differences on an ace-king 2 board. From the small blind's perspective, you're going to be ranging for small with most of your range. And from the big blind's perspective, you are going to be checking mostly and only using bigger sizing. If you guys do not have GTO Wizard, you can use the link in the description and get 10% off a month, and you will get all flop aggregate reports for all positions. If you enjoy this type of content, please give me a like, please give me a subscribe. New video every single day, 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.